What is up guys, my name is Ben Hartwell, thanks for checking out the channel. If it's your first time here, or even if it's not, please consider smashing that subscribe button. It really does help out the channel. So I've had a few comments off you guys asking about amp control with the Line 6 Helix, specifically how to control the V30 and the big Marshall JVM. It's actually a lot easier than you'd think. Let me show you how to do it. Okay, so we'll run through how to do it with the V30 first, as that's a much simpler process than doing it via MIDI with the JVM. It's a relatively straightforward process. All you have to do is connect a regular guitar cable, or you can use a balanced TRS depending on what it is that your amp actually needs, to that external amp socket. That then plugs in to the back of whatever amp it is. In this case, it's the foot switch input on the V30. And then we just have to configure what we actually want sent through that cable by Command Center. Just to let you know what the setup is, I have the Helix plugged directly into the V30. The output of the V30 is going into my reactive load. That's going into a universal audio interface, and we're recording straight into Luna. So once we've got all the connections set up, all we have to do is go into Command Center. Then we just have to choose which foot switch we want to use for the channel switching. So I'll just leave it on this default one. We then just need to change it to external amp, which is the socket we've got that cable plugged into. For this amp and what we need it to do, we can leave all those other settings as they are. So it's going to be a latching type switch, so when we press it down, it's going to stay engaged, which is what we need for channel switching. So that's pretty much all we have to do for an amp this simple. So if we take a listen, that's the dirty channel of the V30. When I engage foot switch 7, we should now switch to the clean channel. There you go. Easy as that. A real big advantage of doing channel switching with the Helix for an amp such as the V30 that only has a shared EQ across those two channels is that I could also assign an EQ block to that foot switch, so that when I change to, say, the dirty channel, it engages a different kind of EQ. Because this is quite a dark sounding drive, I could have it all EQ'd to however I want it to sound and only engage when it's on the dirty channel. Then when I switch back to the clean channel, it disengages that EQ and I'm using whatever EQ I have set on the amp. Really cool. Okay, so that's simple amp switching. Let's look at something more complicated. Let's dive into how to do it with the JVM. It is a little bit more involved, but it's not really that difficult to do. For an amp like the JVM, the easiest way to do all the channel switching that we need to do is via MIDI. Helix does MIDI really well, so it's just a case of hooking up that MIDI cable from the MIDI out of the Helix to the MIDI in of the JVM. Then we do all of the control that we need to through Command Center again. So let's jump into Command Center. Again, it's just a case of choosing which switch we want to do what. So I'll just stick with foot switch 7 to control my clean channel. So all we need to do is tell the Helix what MIDI signals to send out off that foot switch. So we assign that foot switch to bank/program. We need to be on MIDI channel 1. And for this first channel, I'm going to set it to program 1. Then we just need to set that channel up however we want it. So I've got my clean channel set. Then on the JVM, it's just a case of double tapping MIDI. Then we click the foot switch that we just assigned on Helix. That sends its MIDI signal to the JVM. And now when we press that foot switch, it's going to change to that channel. So if I just switch to another channel on the JVM, and now if I press that foot switch, we've changed back to our clean channel. So now all we have to do is set the other foot switches up to control whatever other channels it is that we want to control on the JVM. So let's say that I wanted to have the crunch channel on that next foot switch. It's a piece of cake to do. We go over to that next foot switch. We change it to bank/program. We put it on MIDI channel 1. But this time we're going to send program change 2. We then jump over to our amp. We set the channel up however we want to set it up. Double tap MIDI. Click that foot switch, and that has now told the JVM that we want to change to that channel when we press that foot switch. So if we jump between the two switches, we've got our clean channel on that first foot switch and our crunch channel on that second switch. You'll also notice with the JVM, it's also storing our reverb settings and our master settings. So you can kind of think of it as taking a snapshot of how you have the amp set up and storing it on that one foot switch. And because the JVM has 4 different channels with 3 modes in each channel, we could effectively fill up every foot switch on the Helix with a different kind of channel from the JVM. Now the one big downside of doing it this way on the Helix is there's no real two-way communication between the amp and the Helix to tell it that that foot switch should stay lit. So when we change in, you can see that those foot switches light up momentarily, but at a glance we've no way of telling from the Helix what channel we're on the JVM. Now there is a workaround for this. We could assign those foot switches to snapshots and the snapshot would stay lit, but that also comes with its drawbacks. So let's say you're on snapshot 1, you're on the clean channel as JVM, you had some delay and reverb coming from the Helix, but you'd also engaged an overdrive pedal from the Helix that wasn't part of the snapshot. Now let's say that you want to change to snapshot 2, which was your crunch channel, but you wanted to keep that overdrive engaged. Well, unfortunately, when you change snapshots, any pedals that aren't part of that snapshot are going to get disengaged. So both ways kind of have their advantages and disadvantages. Personally, I like to set it up this way because it gives me a little bit more flexibility and it's pretty easy to tell what channel of the amp you're on, or you can just have a quick turn around and glance at the amp to see which of the channels is lit up. And for me, the added flexibility of setting it up like this far outweighs just not having that light on. So there you go, MIDI with the JVM. Piece of cake. Now any amp that does have MIDI switching capabilities should be able to do this, but they're not necessarily going to follow this same procedure. It does seem to be a little bit trial and error to see what works with which amp. But as you can see, it's not the most complicated of things to get working. And when you do work out how to do it with your amp and what your amp needs, it seems to be a fairly straightforward process. So there you go, I told you it was pretty easy, nothing really too complicated going on there. All you've got to do is make sure you get your connections right, and then it's all about setting it up in Control Center. One word of warning I will say, I have noticed when using that external amp socket on the Helix with the V30, you do sometimes get some noise introduced, and it seems to be on the clean channel. Now that was a few years ago when I first got the Helix that I noticed that noise, and since trying it again here in the studio, there doesn't seem to be any noise introduced, as you can hopefully hear from the recordings. But it's just something to be aware of, that by controlling your amp's channel switching through that external socket, you could introduce some noise depending on what the amp is. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you're now going to be able to use your Helix to control whatever amp it is that you have. If you found this video useful and you liked it, please give it a thumbs up below. If you want to watch another video on my channel, you can do it just up here. And don't forget to subscribe, you can do it right there. I'll see you in the next one.